Hmm. Okay, now it's time to introduce our guest speaker today. He's our own Rick. Used to be our Rick here at the center, but we still feel he's one of our beloveds. So, Rick Kearney, and I'm just going to read his bio here. Rick Kearney is a licensed Center for Spiritual Living minister and board certified chaplain who provides spiritual care to the patients, their families, and the staff of the Tahoe Forest Health System. He serves alongside doctors, nurses, and medical specialists on their interdisciplinary teams that are created to promote a holistic approach in caring for each patient. His role as the primary spiritual caregiver crosses all major components of the health system and includes the Tahoe Forest Hospital, Cancer Center, Long Term Care Center, home health, and hospice services. Prior to working for Tahoe Forest, Rick served as the director of For Goodness Sake, a non denominational spiritual resource center based in Truckee, and he was our associate minister. Chaplain Rick and his wife Marie live in Truckee and are celebrating their 15th wedding anniversary this coming Wednesday, October 11th. His talk today is entitled Walking the Road Less Traveled By. Let's welcome Rick.
Thank you, Penny, and thank you all for inviting me to speak here today. I've been very eager to get back to the center I love so much and to be able to meet with you and to tell you on all the things that have been happening in my life since you saw me standing here last. Yeah, 2 years ago, just about, is when I made my fork in the road type decision. Actually, it was made for me, and I just listened. Uh, like Carol mentioned, that's small, still voice. It literally whispered in my ear. And life hasn't been the same since then. There's been so many changes, so many experiences, so many opportunities for growth that have occurred that I've been blown away by it all. And I still can't completely understand it, but that's okay. It's been this change in me that has taken me, I say, to the next level. And I'll be telling you a little bit about some of those experiences in particular that told me that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But I guess before we get too far down the road, you have to understand what a chaplain is. A chaplain is a minister who goes through additional training, a whole year's worth of training to become a chaplain. And that involves over 300 hours of classroom type instruction, as well as 1,200 hours of on the job training at a hospital where there is an existing chaplain and you're essentially interning uh, with this more senior person who
Person.
gives you opportunities for growth and feedback, whether you want it or not. Uh, my internship was at Renown Hospital in Reno, a major regional medical center, 800 beds with all types of uh, specialties and activities going on. And Reverend Chaplain Brent Hoy Bianchi was my mentor there. And thankfully, I didn't have to go it alone because there were some others who were going through their chaplaincy internship as well. And as a group, we bonded closely and shared with each other the things we had seen and done and learned and the mistakes we had made and gotten advice from each other. Uh, but it was a great opportunity. In addition to all of this training and education came the requirement to have the what they call ecclesiastical endorsement, which is a $10 word for getting the approval of the Home Office. I had it from the CSL, the others had it from their church communities, because chaplaincy is not just one faith tradition. You don't focus on just your own. You need to be ready to walk into a room and support somebody from an entirely different background, whether that be religious or non-religious, spiritual or non-spiritual, that person relies on you to talk and help them on their way forward, their path. And so being familiar with other major faith traditions, other spiritual traditions, and getting to talk with folks who don't particularly have anything in their background was a major part of what I learned along the way. And we learned to be part of a clinical team at a hospital. I mean, literally working side by side, elbow to elbow with doctors and nurses and anesthesiologists and physical therapists and social workers and psychologists. The list goes on and on. But your role there is to represent the spiritual side of things because there's a spiritual side to every person, whether they choose to develop that or not. Uh, that was an eye opener for me. And many times I was the person who was needed in that particular uh, case. Speaking of cases, you watch the medical TV shows and they talk about this patient and that patient, this case and that case. We had cases also. We were required to document as much as we could verbatim what was said in every encounter with on a given day. And we shared with each other and with our instructors some of the more interesting ones. And I think it'd be helpful for you if I were to actually talk you through one of those case studies. And this was about a little more than a year ago now. I was still interning, but I was far enough along that they let me off on my own, let me off the leash. And and this day we were shorthanded because I was the only intern along with Reverend Brent. Uh, and so I was designated as the house chaplain, meaning that I had to respond to anything that was of an emergency nature within the hospital. And sure enough, something did. It was in the early morning hours. I had just about gotten there, had my cup of coffee, and all of a sudden, over the speaker system, code blue, cardiac ward. Code blue is a signal that somebody's heart had stopped and they needed resuscitation now. So knowing that, especially in a case where there's life and death possibilities at least, that I would be needed. So I dashed out the door, ran down the hall, climbed up the 7 flights of stairs to get to the cardiac ward, and arriving out of breath myself, I found that I was the last person to arrive. Already within the patient's room, there were at least a dozen doctors and nurses and cardiologists, people with the paddles, people with the oxygen, and they were wearing armbands to tell each other what their role is in that particular event. They had this down to almost a military precision, who does what in what order, and who was giving orders, who was giving directions, of course, and that was the chief doctor and the chief nurse. Seeing that the patient, who was a woman who was there to get a, a heart operation scheduled the next day, that the medical team was frantically trying to bring her back. I realized that my role was not there at the bedside, but something told me, I don't know where it came from, something told me, where is he? Where is he? So I turned to the nurse and I said, where is he? Oh, the husband, he's over here. He's in the hallway, sitting by himself. That's where I needed to be. So I went and sat next to him, and I introduced myself, who I was, what I do, why I'm there. I asked him his name, and he was in a state of shock. He was clearly having the worst day of his life because the one he loved had just taken her last breath. And I sat next to him, and again, I don't know what caused me to do it, but I put my arm on his shoulder, and I said, is there anything I can do? And he looked to me and he said, yeah, can we say a prayer? Say a prayer that she be saved. And of course, and I asked him, is it a Christian prayer? And that's it. The answer is yes, 9 out of 10 times. And so I gave a prayer for her healing and her recovery, and that divine guidance come to the doctors and nurses as they do what they do. But again, inside me came something else. But Lord, if this is the day that you call her home, may we be brave enough to let her go. May we have the strength to live until we see her again. Amen. And there was a long pause. And he turned to me and he said, you know, it was just last week that we talked about this, that we would agree that if she didn't survive the operation, that she didn't want to be living a life hooked up to machines. She didn't want to be a burden. She wanted me to let her go. I said, that's good that you know that. It's good that you talked about that, because now there's no question in your mind. And as we were talking, as we sat, I noticed that it was taking quite a while for anybody to come out of that room, that they were clearly still working in there, and that it wasn't going well. But still, I closed my eyes and said a spiritual mind treatment for her. But it was not to be. The doctor came down to where we were, and she stood, and we stood, and she explained that they were able to revive her heart 3 separate times, but every time they started it, that stopped once again, and they started it and it stopped, and they started it and it stopped. And now she came to him to ask him, what did he want us to do? We, the medical team. If we were to revive her, she would not be the same. It's been too long without her brain getting any oxygen. It's been too long. She would be hooked up to a machine. And the husband looked to me, didn't say anything, then looked back to the doctor and said, it's time to let her go. It's time to let her go. This is what she wanted. And so the doctor said, thank you. I agree with your decision. We'll go disconnect her from the machines. We'll clean her up, and just give me a few minutes and we'll have you come in to say your goodbyes. And as the doctor walked away, the husband turned to me and said, was that selfish of me? And I asked, what do you mean selfish? She told you what she wanted. You gave her that wish. There's nothing selfish about that. Okay. A minute or so goes by, and the doctor reemerges from the room and waves us down. And I meant to walk with him just to the door. But when we got to the door, he said, no, I want you with me. I want you to come inside. All of the medical team had cleared out by this time, but yet they lingered in the hallway. So he walked over to the bed, and he sat down next to her bed and held her lifeless hand. And he turns to me and said, can you give her a blessing on her way to heaven? Of course I can. And I gave her the blessing, looked to him and said, this is your time to say all those things you need to say. And I'm going to step outside this door, but I'll be right there if you need me. So you tell her you love her. Tell her you won't miss her already. Tell her that you'll see her again. And so I turned and I walked out, and I walked out the door to see at least 12, 15 different faces looking at me. they had been standing at the door listening to it all. And I noticed there was somebody off in the corner by herself, uh, a young woman. She had on a nurse uniform, the scrubs, and she was softly crying. And I was kind of softly crying myself, to be honest. And I noticed that no one was speaking to her. No one else of that whole group was paying her any attention. And so I felt led to walk over towards her, stopping about 3 feet away. Are you okay? Yeah, was the answer, which I did not believe. And again, from within or without, uh, the words out of my lips were, would a hug help you? I just opened my arms. She came over and we embraced. And as I look over her shoulder, I see everybody's eyes on us. And I did this, waving my hands, encouraging them to, to join. The social worker said, let's all give a hug. And that team came and put their arms around us. Later on, I learned from the head nurse, they had never done that before. But it was incredibly therapeutic. Because in her words, while a patient is still living, we got to hold ourselves together. But when the patient is beyond our help, we need to be respectful and respect ourselves. Well, you can imagine that after this experience that my legs were like jelly. I was emotionally spent, spiritually exhausted, and I knew that I was not going to be any good for anybody, at least for a little while. And I got inspired yet again in this process, and the word babies came to mind. Babies, I need babies. I headed off to the nursery, and at the nursery, the nurses knew me, and they saw me. Would you like to sit down for a while? Just sit down right here and be around the sounds of life, new life, fresh, clean life. And I was there for at least 15 minutes or so, soaking it all in, soaking in the, uh, the sounds of the babies, the sounds of the young parents, feeding babies, changing diapers, doing all the things young parents do. And I was restored. That is one of the most life-changing events in my chaplaincy experience thus far, because I knew that I had done it right. I knew that I had helped not just the husband, not just the nurse, but all of those who were involved in this. You know, our time on earth is always shorter than we expect, we hope. But by being there when someone passed and being there for those who loved her and helped her, that I was doing good in the world. There are other things I do when I meet with patients. Sometimes I say prayers. Sometimes I give blessings. I have actually, presided at some ceremonies. Holding on to, I also counsel people uh, individually and in groups. We have a spiritual support group for those who are challenged by their medical situation. There's a grief support group that's aimed at the staff. That's because they have to hold it together and later on do their grieving. There's also intervention. Intervention when need to do more than listen, but to help a person to see the choices that they have available to make. In another case study, I was called to visit with a woman who had attempted suicide and failed, obviously. Uh, but upon she had asked to see the chaplain, and I wasn't quite sure why. I could tell from her medical record that she was a member of a Christian denomination, uh, about 50 years old. And upon arriving at her hospital room, I found a person sitting at the open door looking inward. Um, she was on suicide watch. Most of the equipment that are normally in a hospital room had been taken out. It was simply the bed, a chair, and a table for her medications and her meals. She was curled up in a fetal position, facing away from the door. So she wouldn't make eye contact with the watcher. And when I knocked and entered, she mumbled, "Come in," um, but she didn't look up. She didn't turn to face me. I just walked in and sat in the chair. That's the only thing I could think to do. Uh, and I asked, how can I help you today? You asked to see me. Uh, and her words, "I've ruined my connection with God." Do you care to explain? What do you mean you ruined your connection with God? I tried to take my life. I'm never going to be close to God again. I see. I want you to start. Tell me what happened. And so she related the story uh, that her husband has stage 4 lung cancer. Her teenage son is a drug addict. She had been providing the care for them both um, for years and had had enough. She has clinical depression and doesn't see how she could possibly get through this. And so as I listened, I could see that this was a plea for help. This was a plea for advice. Um, when she was done, um, she said to me, because I tried to commit suicide, that I'll never go to heaven. I'll never be close to God again. Oh, really? I really had to realize. I recognized that due to her experience, which was an extreme experience, of course, that she was not really thinking things through. I could just tell that she wanted to hear something. And I suspected that she was looking to me as like this religious authority who would uh, chastise her, condemn her, yell at her perhaps. And she was tensed up. She was still in this ball as I started to speak. And I said, "You need to understand something. The God I know loves you. The God I know would never turn his back on you." And she started to slowly turn to face me for the first time. But I tried to commit suicide. God loves you. There's nothing you can do or say that's going to change that. That is, God loves you just as you are. And, we all make mistakes. Some are more extreme than others. But let me tell you something. The leadership of your church and I had familiarity. They do not support suicide. They don't encourage suicide, but they know that people who have serious illnesses sometimes take their own lives, and they're not to be condemned, not to be cast out. You have nothing to fear in that department. But, but I had to really lead her by the hand at this point, and say, you yourself told me you have clinical depression. You yourself told me that you've been hospitalized for your depression, that you weren't in your right mind when you made the attempt. The church does not condemn you. I don't condemn you. Remember that Bible story I said to her? Do you remember that Bible story where there was a woman who was caught with someone not her husband, and she was in the circle about to be stoned? And Jesus said, he who is without any sin cast the first stone. And one by one, the men dropped their stones and walked away. She remembered that story. Do you remember what Jesus said at the end of that story? He said, there's no one here condemns you. I don't condemn you. Just go and sin no more. Think, how would that apply in your life? Well, I should go, take my meds, see my doctors. That's right. That's right. By this time, she was now sitting up on the edge of her bed, facing me, and and thinking much more clearly than when I first walked in the room. So normally a chaplain does not get to that level of intervention, but in this case, the sense was that's what she needed, and I pray that she's doing well. That's the bad part of this. I help people. I develop a personal connection, but I don't see them again after they leave. I can only pray that they are well. Anyway, you've heard me talk long enough. Let me just kind of summarize some of the things that I've learned along the way. Number one is to listen to that small, still voice. That is the God within speaking, the God within guiding. It's incredible how the doors just opened for me when I decided to listen to that. When I finished my schooling, the director of the Tahoe Forest Cancer Center came up to me one day and said, we'd like you to apply for this job we're creating. It'll be our very first staff chaplain, and you'd be the perfect guy. It'd be perfect. Would you be interested? Yes, I'd be interested. That's my call. That's my path, the fork and the road. You have to remember that God works through us. It is the way that it works, that working through us, it's not Rick who's making these things happen. It's God. That God is using my hands, using my voice, using my presence to heal the sick, to comfort the grieving. And that the world needs us. The world needs us to be that presence, to allow this to happen, to share our skills and to help those who need us so very much. So I encourage you all to do so in any way possible. Do what you can, where you can, and just like the butterfly effect, the force of 1,000 million, hundreds of millions of butterflies are going to change this world for the better. Please join me in a prayer. There is just one source, one God, creator of all, working in and through us, as us, and that the, the love of this God is infinite. The power of this God is beyond all measure. Nothing it cannot do. And that is also true of us when we allow the Spirit to use us. So we go forth this day, listening for that small, still voice, taking the road less traveled, and being a force for good in the world. I release my word into the law, knowing it's already acted upon. It cannot be denied. I give great thanks, and so it is.